The film Snow Tapes came out of a much larger project involving my work in Hebron, specifically in giving out video cameras to Palestinian families living in areas, let's say so-called hotspots, areas of high friction between Palestinian civilians and Israeli security forces or Israeli civilians, settlers in the city. Hebron is unique in the sense that it's the only Palestinian city that has a Jewish population inside the city, really living as door-to-door neighbors, Palestinians and Israelis in the same neighborhoods. And because of that, there's a lot of daily friction. A lot of that is at the personal level between neighbors. I gave, along with a few other people, a camera to the El-Haddad family in early 2007. And this was really the start of the relationship. It began as a semi-professional relationship, where I gave them the camera and I took responsibility in teaching them how to use it. And then there was a kind of a process of follow-up, which quickly devolved from being a professional relationship between a filmmaker and his collaborators into a very personal relationship. I also eventually ended up living in that neighborhood and became another Israeli neighbor of the family. But despite the relationship, which is a personal and which is I would say a real friendship, the way you would have with anyone you'd spend a lot of time. Most of the time was never spent filming or talking about film. It became very quickly about my life and their life and what happens between two people of any background. But despite that, always under the surface, given the conflict, given also the severity of the conflict in that particular place, you can't separate. I mean, there's no way to extract the fact that I'm an Israeli and they're Palestinians from that relationship. It's a relationship that's in it is embedded a dynamic of power and a complete imbalance of power. So despite all my good intentions, and no matter what kind of personal attitude I might have to the people I encounter there, I'm still an Israeli. I have a different ID. I am protected by a whole different set of laws. In a city like Hebron, there is a law for Israelis, which is a civilian law, and there's a law for Palestinians, which is a military law. We're not in the same game, and this also very much affects the kind of violent events that you see in the film, or don't see in the film, but it's very, very clear to everyone what the distinctions are. So I think I could say, really at the personal level, that there is a great deal of trust between me and the El-Haddad family. But to be honest, at the same time, there's a gap. And I think that gap is in the material, and that gap is in the difference between how they film events and then how they relate these events in my presence, how they discuss them and how they react to them. You can't take me out from behind the camera. And I try to make that apparent, maybe in subtle ways, but make it apparent that there is a person behind the camera, and that person is not neutral. My camera is not just a fly on the wall. There's an Israeli, and I think I get addressed by name once or twice in the film, but I wanted to make that very, very clear. Specifically with this film, the material in the film, their material in the film, is a very small part of a much larger collection of footage. Most of it is much more violent, shocking, and explicit than what I ended up using, and I specifically chose something that is a little more confusing or that requires more active interpretation on the part of the audience. I kind of shied away from making a documentary that is newsworthy. But in general, I'll first say about this kind of material. Initially, this kind of footage, this kind of first-person direct recording of what's happening in places in the West Bank had a lot of impact in the Israeli media, also internationally. Another family in that same neighborhood recorded a settler woman cursing at them in a very foul, very direct way, and that made a lot of echoes really at the beginning of this project in 2007. But after that, I think, and a lot of people in Hebron sadly realized this, the impact was very, very limited. I think a lot of people have a slightly innocent approach to media initially, and documentary filmmakers tend to make this worse, where people there's kind of an agreement between the filmmaker and the subject, by which you ask people to let them into your lives and to expose themselves, and given their specific political hardship, to expose something very difficult about their lives. And I think part of the deal implicitly is that if people see these kind of films, they will go out and change the reality on screen. And I think that's something that documentary filmmaking has never actually kept. That side of the bargain has never been kept, I think, sadly, because people don't react to films in the kind of emotional or in the kind of active way that we would hope them to. So I would have to say that there are limitations to what effect this has had. I think personally, within the El-Haddad families, I think participating in this film was very empowering for them. I don't want to say that I gave them a voice. I find that a little exaggerated. But I think they found something in the process that was very pleasurable and hopeful for them, I think. They got to see the film. I made them DVDs, but they also got to see it screened in Jerusalem, which meant that I got them permits to go into Israel for a film screening, which is funny because otherwise they have no ability to go into Israel for employment, for travel, for visiting family, for anything. So in a funny way is that it's easier to get. You might have family in Jerusalem, let's say, that you would never be able to see, but if a short film that you participated in gets screened at a festival, suddenly you're no longer a security threat and you're allowed into the country. And this is what happened with the family in this film.